I never believed in hell, until I saw it with my own eyes. One moment I was gasping for breath, the next, I was plunging into a fiery abyss, surrounded by screams of eternal torment. Demonic shadows clawed at me, dragging me deeper, whispering that I was theirs forever. Just as the darkness consumed me, a blinding light shattered the void. A voice thundered, "You are not ready!" What happened next changed my life, and it could change yours too. Here is my personal testimony. My name is Elijah, and if you had met me a few years ago, you wouldn't have recognized me. I was a broken man, lost in a cycle of emptiness, chasing after things that never truly satisfied. I had convinced myself that I was in control, that I could fix my own life, but the more I tried, the deeper I sank. I was drowning in depression, burdened by regret, and though I didn't realize it at the time, I was spiritually starving. Then, something happened, something that changed everything. I never truly understood fasting before. I thought it was just a religious duty, a ritual that people did to appear holy. I had seen others fast, but I never grasped its true purpose. I assumed it was about skipping meals to impress God, a sacrifice to earn blessings. But I was wrong. What I discovered was that fasting wasn't about deprivation, it was about transformation. It was about emptying myself so that God could fill me. I need to share this testimony because there are many people like I once was, desperate for change, seeking answers, but looking in all the wrong places. Maybe that's you. Maybe you feel a deep void inside, a sense that something is missing, but you don't know how to fix it. Maybe you've tried everything, success, relationships, distractions, but nothing has brought you peace. I want you to know that there is a way out. I had reached a point where I couldn't ignore my spiritual hunger any longer. Life had become unbearable. Every day felt like a battle I was losing. My mind was consumed with negativity, my heart was filled with anger, and I had no direction. Even when I prayed, I felt like my words hit an empty sky and fell back down. I was disconnected from God, drowning in silence. Then, the moment of awakening came. It started with a near-death experience that shook me to my core. I remember that day vividly, the moment my body gave out, the terrifying darkness that consumed me, and the horrifying reality of what lay beyond. It was in that moment, staring into the abyss of eternity, that I realized how lost I truly was. I wasn't just struggling, I was dying inside. But even in my darkest moment, God had not abandoned me. In the very depths of despair, I heard a voice, clear, powerful, and undeniable. A voice that called me out of my misery. A voice that offered me a way back. And that way was through fasting. I didn't know it yet, but fasting would become the key to unlocking everything I had been searching for. It would take me from desperation to deliverance, from torment to transformation. And today, I stand here, a changed man, with a story that I pray will reach those who need to hear it. This is not just my story, it's a testimony of God's power. And if you're willing to listen, it just might change your life too. I never expected to die that night. It was an ordinary evening, or at least it started that way. I had been feeling unwell for days, an unbearable weight pressed on my chest, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. At first, I dismissed it as stress, exhaustion from the countless burdens I carried. I had been battling depression, anxiety, and a sense of hopelessness that no amount of distraction could cure. I drank to numb the pain, indulged in everything the world had to offer, yet I was never satisfied. I felt like I was drifting towards something dark, but I had no idea just how real that darkness was. That night, as I lay in bed, an overwhelming fatigue washed over me, far heavier than simple exhaustion. A sudden wave of dizziness hit, and then, nothing. My vision tunneled, my limbs went numb, and for the first time in my life, I felt something inside me slipping away, as if my very soul was being pulled from my body. Then, everything went black. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But as I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a place that defied reason, a vast, endless expanse of darkness. It wasn't simply the absence of light. It was an oppressive, consuming void that seemed alive. The air was thick, suffocating, and a foul stench burned my nostrils. I tried to move, but my body felt weightless and powerless. The silence around me wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. I called out, but my voice was swallowed whole by the emptiness. I was alone. Panic began to creep in. Was this death? Was I dreaming? I tried to wake up, but I couldn't. I was trapped. Then, the silence broke. A low, guttural whisper slithered through the darkness, sending chills down my spine. It was a language I didn't recognize, yet I understood every word. "You are ours." A sudden, blinding heat engulfed me. I gasped, but no air filled my lungs. A force beyond comprehension seized me, yanking me downward at an impossible speed. My body plummeted, spiraling into an abyss that seemed to stretch on forever. The deeper I fell, the hotter it became, an unbearable, scorching fire that didn't burn my flesh but tortured my soul. Then I hit the ground. If you could call it that. The landscape was something out of a nightmare. The sky was a swirling blood-red storm, flickering with lightning that never illuminated. The ground beneath me was cracked, blackened, seething with a molten glow, but it wasn't lava. It was something alive, pulsing, writhing beneath my feet like it was hungry. Then came the screams. The most horrific, soul-wrenching screams I had ever heard. They came from everywhere. Shadows moved in the distance, figures writhing, tormented, reaching out, but no one could help each other. Everyone suffered alone. A foul wind carried cries of agony, each voice filled with regret, despair, and terror beyond comprehension. And then I heard my own voice among them. I was screaming too. I tried to move, to run, but something latched onto my ankles. Hands. They clawed, burned, and pulled. I thrashed, kicking wildly, but the grip only tightened. They wanted me there. Then I saw them. Demonic creatures, hideous beyond words, with eyes that burned like dying embers. They towered over me, twisted and grotesque, their bodies shifting and flickering like smoke but solid enough to tear into me with their claws. One of them grinned, a jagged, broken smile filled with malice. "You were warned," one of them hissed. Then, the pain came. It wasn't like any earthly pain. It was soul pain, something so deep, so unbearable, that I would have chosen to be burned alive 1,000 times over rather than endure it for a single second. It was every sin, every failure, every regret crushing me at once. I knew why I was there. I had rejected God. I had ignored His warnings. I had chosen my own desires over righteousness. And now, I was paying the price. The creatures laughed as my body convulsed. Flames crawled up my skin, but they didn't consume me, they only tortured. My flesh melted and reformed, a cycle of agony without end. And the worst part? I felt forgotten. I knew no one was coming for me. This was my eternity. Then, something shifted. The laughter stopped. The demons froze. The very air trembled as an impossibly bright light erupted from above. It was like a sword slicing through the abyss, cutting away the darkness in an instant. And then I heard His voice. A voice that was not of this world, yet so familiar, like a whisper I had always known but had refused to listen to. Enough. The creatures shrieked and scattered like insects, hissing as they fled from the light. The chains around me broke. The searing pain vanished. The suffocating weight lifted. I collapsed, gasping. Then, He spoke again. "You are not ready. But if you do not change, you will return here." Tears streamed down my face. I knew it was Jesus. And I knew He was giving me a second chance. A force greater than anything I had ever felt pulled me upward, away from the pit, away from the torment, back through the darkness. The next thing I knew, I gasped for air, my body convulsing as I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a drum. I was alive. But I was not the same. That night, I fell to my knees, shaking, weeping, crying out to God. I begged Him to never let me go back there. I swore to change. But I had no idea where to start. Then, as if the answer had been waiting all along, I heard the voice again, this time, gentle but firm. Fast. I didn't understand at first. Fast? What did that mean? Was I supposed to give up food? What did fasting have to do with what I had just experienced? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about the act itself. It was about surrender. It was about emptying myself so that He could fill me. I had just come back from the very depths of hell. And now, I had been given a chance to escape it forever. But first I had to die to myself, before it was too late. And so, my journey began. The moment the light pierced the darkness, everything around me froze. The burning ground, the writhing figures, the grotesque creatures, all of it became motionless, as if time itself had shattered. The demonic laughter that had filled the air turned into agonized screeches, like wild beasts caught in a trap. The atmosphere trembled as if the very essence of this place recognized the presence of something infinitely greater. Then, from the center of the brilliant light, I heard His voice. It wasn't loud in the way thunder roars, nor was it soft like a whisper. It was absolute, a voice that didn't just reach my ears but commanded my entire being. It was power, it was authority, it was love beyond understanding. Enough. The demons scattered like insects, hissing in terror as they retreated into the shadows. The weight crushing me vanished. The burning agony disappeared. The chains that had shackled me crumbled into dust. I fell onto my knees, gasping, clutching at the now cool ground, trying to comprehend what was happening. I looked up and saw the source of the light, a figure standing before me, wrapped in radiant fire, clothed in a brilliance that was impossible to describe. His face. I could not see His face. It was too holy, too glorious. But I knew who He was. It was Jesus. Tears poured down my face. My whole body trembled. The reality of my existence, my failures, my sins, and my rejection of Him crashed down upon me all at once. I wasn't just seeing a vision. I was in the presence of the Almighty. I wanted to speak, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but before I could form the words, His voice echoed again, and this time, it went deeper than my flesh, deeper than my bones. It pierced straight into my soul. You are not ready. But if you do not change, you will return here. The words struck me like lightning, leaving me breathless. Return here? No! I couldn't come back to this place. I had barely endured minutes, maybe even seconds, of its torment, and it had been unbearable. The thought of eternity in such suffering made me collapse in desperation. Please! I sobbed, my voice hoarse, broken. Please, Jesus, give me another chance. I can't go back there. I can't. I'll change. I swear I'll change. There was a silence, not a rejection, but a pause, as if heaven itself was weighing my plea. Then, for the first time in my life, I felt something beyond human understanding enter me. It was as if pure peace, pure truth, pure love was being poured into my very being. It was Him, His Spirit. If you want to live, you must die to yourself. The words resonated in my soul. You must fast. I blinked in confusion. Fast? I had heard of fasting, but I had never taken it seriously. Wasn't it just something religious people did to appear holy? Why was it the key to my survival? Jesus continued, His voice steady and filled with divine certainty. Your flesh has ruled over you for too long. You have lived for yourself, ignoring my voice, chasing things that are temporary. But the flesh profits nothing, it will perish. Only the Spirit gives life. I felt every failure flash before me, every moment I had ignored God, every time I had drowned my pain in distractions instead of seeking Him. I had been spiritually asleep, feeding my body while starving my soul. Fasting will break the chains that bind you. It will teach you to hunger for me instead of the world. It will open your ears to my voice and your eyes to my kingdom. Through fasting and prayer, you will be made new. I wept uncontrollably. I had never been taught this. No one had ever told me that fasting wasn't just about food, it was about surrender. Will you surrender? I was terrified, but I knew the answer before I even spoke. How could I not? Yes, I cried, my voice cracking. Yes, Lord! I will fast. I will seek you. Just please, please don't let me go back there. There was a pause, and then I felt it. A hand on my head. The touch was gentle yet powerful, and as soon as it made contact, a shockwave of light and energy coursed through me. Every ounce of fear, regret, and doubt burned away in an instant, replaced by a feeling so powerful, so overwhelming, that I thought my body wouldn't be able to contain it. It was his presence. Then rise. Suddenly, the darkness around me ripped apart like paper, and I felt myself being lifted, pulled upward at an impossible speed. The screams of hell faded, the suffocating heat vanished, and for a brief moment, I was surrounded by nothing but light, pure, endless, eternal light. Then, everything went black again. And I woke up. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if I had been drowning. My body convulsed, my chest heaving violently. Sweat drenched me. My heart pounded against my ribs. I reached for my face, my arms, my legs. I was back. I was alive. But something was different. I could still feel him. His words echoed in my mind, clearer than anything I had ever known. Fast. The moment I sat up, I knew I couldn't go back to who I was before. Everything had changed. I stumbled out of bed, fell to my knees, and sobbed like a child. Not just out of fear of what I had seen, but because of what I now understood. I had wasted so much time, so many years feeding my flesh while my spirit starved. I had been blind to the spiritual war around me. I had been so consumed with my own pain, my own desires, that I had failed to see that God had been calling me all along. But now, I had been given one last chance. I couldn't waste it. I had no idea how to start. I didn't know the right way to fast, how long to do it, or what I was supposed to pray for. But I knew one thing: I would not delay. I had seen hell with my own eyes. I had felt its torment. I had heard its hopelessness. I would never go back. And so, with trembling hands and a heart that had finally surrendered, I whispered my first real prayer in years. Jesus, help me. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew one thing. This time, I would follow. The morning after my near-death experience, I woke up feeling like a different person. It wasn't just the terror of what I had seen, it was the undeniable pull in my spirit. A hunger, but not for food. I was starving, not physically, but spiritually. For the first time in my life, I wanted nothing but God. His last words echoed in my mind. Fast. I had no idea how to begin. I had never fasted before, and I wasn't even sure what it meant beyond skipping meals. But I knew one thing: I had to obey. I decided to start small, one day without food. The first few hours weren't difficult, but by midday, my body began to fight back. My stomach twisted in hunger. My hands shook. My mind screamed at me to eat, to just take one bite. This is foolish. God doesn't care if you eat. You'll make yourself sick. The thoughts flooded my mind like an attack. I almost gave in. Then I remembered where I had been. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath, and whispered, "No. I need God more than I need food." Matthew 4 verse 4 came to mind. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. I forced myself to press on. Instead of eating, I prayed. Instead of scrolling through my phone, I opened the Bible. I had no idea what to read, so I simply flipped through the pages until my eyes landed on Isaiah 58 verse 6. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? I read it again. Fasting wasn't just about denying food, it was about breaking chains. I had been bound in ways I never even realized. My depression, my addictions, my fear, these were my chains. And God was telling me that fasting was the key to my freedom. That night, as hunger gnawed at my stomach, I sat in complete silence. No distractions. No noise. Just waiting. And then, I heard it. A voice, but not like the one in hell. This one was gentle, clear, unmistakable. It didn't come through my ears, but directly into my spirit. I am here. Tears streamed down my face. God was speaking to me. It wasn't a long message. It wasn't complex. But it was real. For the first time in my life, I realized God had always been speaking. I had just been too distracted to hear Him. Encouraged by what had happened, I decided to extend my fast for another day. That was when the real battle began. The hunger was worse, but more than that, I started experiencing deep, unexplainable emotions. Old memories surfaced, failures, regrets, pains I had buried long ago. It felt like my soul was being torn open. I began to realize something. Fasting wasn't just affecting my body, it was exposing my spirit. That night, as I knelt in prayer, I felt a dark presence enter the room. A shadow moved in the corner. A heavy pressure pushed down on my chest. The air turned ice cold. Then I heard a whisper, one I recognized from hell. "You don't belong to him." Fear gripped me. My body wanted to run, to turn on the lights, to hide under the covers. But something deep inside told me, "Stand your ground." With trembling hands I opened my Bible. The page fell on James 4 verse 7. "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." I clenched my jaw, closed my eyes, and whispered, "In the name of Jesus, leave." Instantly, the room shifted. The heaviness lifted. The darkness vanished. I had never felt power like that before. By the third day, something inside me broke. The hunger was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. The distractions, the temptations, the addictions, they had lost their grip. I felt free. I had spent so many years chained to my past, to my fears, to my sins, but now, those chains were falling off. God was showing me what fasting really was. It wasn't about suffering, it was about surrender. As I pressed deeper into prayer, visions began to come. One night, I saw myself standing at a great door, massive and golden, glowing with light. But the door was locked. I pounded on it, desperate to get in. Then, Jesus appeared beside me. He looked at me, then at the chains still wrapped around my wrists. "You cannot enter with these." I woke up in a cold sweat. The message was clear. There were still things I needed to let go of. I continued fasting, sometimes for a day, sometimes for 3, sometimes even for a week. And with each fast, I could feel the presence of God growing stronger in my life. I found myself praying longer, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. Worship music began to move me in ways it never had before. I would play songs of praise, and peace would flood the room. One day, as I worshipped, I felt a wave of heat wash over me, not physical heat, but something deeper. I fell to my knees, trembling, as I felt the Holy Spirit surround me. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be filled with God. One of the biggest battles I had faced was addiction, to lust, to distractions, to things that stole my time and my peace. Fasting destroyed those addictions. The cravings stopped. The urges died. I realized that when you starve your flesh, your spirit grows stronger. As I continued fasting, the Bible became alive to me. I clung to verses like Matthew 6 verses 16 to 18. "When you fast, do not be like the hypocrites, but your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you openly." Joel 2 verse 12. "Return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning." 2 Corinthians 10 verse 4. "The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds." I was no longer the man I had been before my fast. The depression? Gone. The fear? Crushed. The chains? Broken. I felt alive for the first time. And this was just the beginning. Fasting had become a lifestyle, and through it, God was leading me deeper into His presence. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was free. As I grew spiritually, so did the attacks. At first, I thought that after fasting and experiencing God so powerfully, life would become easier. But I was wrong. If anything, the enemy fought harder. The first attack came through my finances. Shortly after my fast, everything started falling apart. My small business, which had been my only source of income, began to crumble. Orders were delayed, customers disappeared, and debts piled up. I prayed, I trusted, but the situation only got worse. At one point, I had nothing left in my account. Not a single dollar. I had never been this desperate before. Doubt began to creep in. Why is this happening, God? I cried out one night. I did what you asked. I fasted, I prayed. Why am I suffering even more? No answer. Just silence. Then came the second attack, rejection from my family. When I shared my testimony, I expected them to rejoice. Instead, I was met with skepticism, mockery, and distance. You're taking this too seriously. You've gone too deep into religion. Are you sure you weren't just hallucinating? Their words stung. The people who were supposed to love and support me were pushing me away. I sat alone in my room one night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of loneliness press on my chest. Did I make a mistake? I whispered. Was all of this just in my head? The enemy pounced on my doubts. You were fine before this. Just go back to the way things were. You don't have to take this so seriously. A temptation I never expected suddenly hit me, the urge to just quit fasting, stop praying, and go back to my old life. It was subtle, almost comforting. The thought of going back to my distractions, to my comfortable life, seemed so easy. But deep inside I knew the truth. I could never go back. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt it again, that same oppressive darkness from before. The air became heavy. The temperature dropped. My body froze. And then I saw it. A shadowy figure stood at the foot of my bed, tall, twisted, with eyes that burned like coals. It didn't speak, but I could feel its presence, hatred, rage, a suffocating evil unlike anything I had ever known. I tried to move, to scream, but I was paralyzed. Then, the whisper came. You don't belong to him. A wave of fear crashed over me. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. This was no dream. This was real. I had two choices, give in to the fear or call on the name of Jesus. Summoning every ounce of strength, I forced out the only word I could. Jesus. The moment his name left my lips, the atmosphere shifted. A bright, blinding light filled the room. The figure screeched, its form twisting violently before vanishing into nothing. I gasped for air, my body trembling. The oppression was gone. I sat up, breathing heavily, and in that moment, I understood. This was war. The enemy wasn't attacking me because I was weak. He was attacking me because I was dangerous. I grabbed my Bible, flipped to Psalm 91, and read it out loud. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That night, I fell on my knees, weeping like a child. God, I can't do this alone. I need you. The desperation in my voice was real. I had come too far to turn back now, but I was exhausted. Then, something incredible happened. I felt a hand on my shoulder. A warmth, unlike anything I had ever known, flooded my body. It was peace, overwhelming peace, the kind that can only come from God. And then I heard him. I am with you. 3 simple words, but they changed everything. Suddenly I knew God had never left me. Even in the silence, even in the suffering, he was there. This was my test of faith, and I was not going to fail it. That night, I had a vision. I was walking through a desert, dry, empty, endless. My body was weak, my mouth parched, my legs giving out beneath me. I wanted to collapse, to give up. Then I looked ahead. In the distance, I saw a river, wide, clear, overflowing with life. But something stood between me and the water. A veil, thick, black, impenetrable. I pushed against it, but it wouldn't move. Then, Jesus appeared beside me. Without a word, he handed me a key. I looked down, confused. The key was inscribed with one word, fasting. I turned back to the veil, took a deep breath, and pressed the key into it. Immediately it shattered. The river rushed toward me, consuming me in its waters. I wasn't drowning, I was being filled. Then I woke up. The message was clear. Fasting wasn't just helping me survive, it was unlocking something greater. The enemy had tried to stop me, through fear, through financial struggle, through rejection, but he failed. Because God was with me. The next morning, I got up, wiped my tears, and declared, I will not quit. I will fast. I will pray. I will fight. And I will win. And in that moment I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The night of my vision changed me forever. I woke up with a renewed fire in my spirit, an unshakable determination that no trial, no demon, no fear could take away. I had been tested, broken, and nearly defeated, but through fasting and prayer, I had emerged stronger. I no longer saw fasting as just an act of obedience. It had become a way of life. And because of it, everything changed. Before, I had lived for my own desires, feeding my flesh while starving my spirit. But now, my life was fully surrendered to God. The first thing I did was commit to regular fasting. I set aside specific days each week, not out of religious obligation, but out of desperation for more of God. Some fasts lasted a day, some 3, some even a full week. And every single time, something supernatural happened. Fasting was no longer a struggle. It became a joy, a time of intimacy with God, revelation, and breakthrough. I started waking up before dawn just to seek His presence, spending hours in prayer and worship. The more I fasted, the clearer His voice became. It was as if a veil had been lifted. I could finally hear Him, sense Him, and understand what He was leading me to do. And as I pressed in, miracles began to unfold. One evening, a close friend called me in desperation. His mother had been sick for months, and doctors had no answers. Please, Elijah, he begged. I don't know what else to do. I had never prayed for healing before. But something inside me, a confidence that wasn't my own, rose up. I'll come. When I arrived, his mother was weak, barely conscious. The room felt heavy, almost like the presence of death itself lingered there. I closed my eyes and whispered, Holy Spirit, you are the healer. Not me. Use me. Then I did the only thing I knew. I laid my hands on her and prayed. I don't even remember the words I spoke. It was as if someone else was speaking through me. Suddenly she sat up, her weak body trembling, but her eyes filled with light and strength. I feel different, she whispered. Her son stared in shock. Within days, she was completely healed. The doctors couldn't explain it. But I could. It was Jesus. Remember when my business was failing? I had lost everything. But after fasting and fully surrendering my finances to God, something miraculous happened. Clients started coming back. Orders multiplied. People I had never met before suddenly sowed into my life, not knowing my struggles, but feeling led to bless me. One day, a man walked into my store, looked around, and simply said, God told me to help you. He paid off one of my largest debts on the spot. I nearly fell to my knees right there. This wasn't just business. It was God showing me that when you seek Him first, He provides. Matthew 6 verse 33 became real to me. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Fasting had already set me free from addiction, but now, I saw its power to free others. A young man from my church came to me, weeping. He had been tormented by depression, suicidal thoughts, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I don't know what to do, he said. I knew the answer. We fast. We began a 3-day fast together. The first day, he struggled. The second day, he almost gave up. But on the third day, everything shifted. He walked into the prayer meeting with tears streaming down his face. It's gone, he whispered. The darkness, it's gone. That night, he gave his life fully to Christ. God hadn't just transformed me, He was now using me to help others experience the same breakthrough. I began speaking about fasting, sharing my testimony whenever I could. People started asking questions. wanting to understand why it was so powerful. So I told them, because it kills your flesh so that God can fully live in you. Fasting isn't about starving your body. It's about feeding your spirit. It's about taking authority over your own desires and saying, God, you are my only source. For the first time in my life, I experienced real peace. Not the kind that comes from temporary happiness, but the kind that remains even in the middle of storms. I no longer feared the future. I no longer questioned my worth. I knew who I was. I was His. And that truth changed everything. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that fasting isn't a one-time fix, it's a lifestyle. The enemy would still try to attack. The world would still bring challenges. But through fasting, prayer, and staying in the Word, I had the weapons to fight back. I clung to verses like Psalm 34 verse 10. The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Galatians 5 verse 16. Walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Isaiah 40 verse 31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles, they shall run and not be weary, they shall walk and not faint. God had given me a new life, and I was never going back. I had always searched for answers in the wrong places. But in the end, the answer was simple: fast, pray, surrender. It was the key to hearing God, walking in power, and living in freedom. Looking back, I realize everything I lost was worth it. The old me had to die so that the new me could live. And this new life? It was everything I never knew I needed. If you are reading this and you feel lost, if you are drowning in sin, addiction, depression, or emptiness, I need you to hear me. There is a way out. I was where you are now. I was broken, trapped, and blind to the truth. I searched for peace in all the wrong places, and it led me straight into darkness. I ignored God's voice for years, until He allowed me to see where my choices were leading me. I saw hell. Not as an idea, not as a distant possibility, but as a real place, filled with real suffering. A place where souls cry out for a second chance that will never come. A place where I should have ended up, but God, in His mercy, pulled me out. And He is calling you too. This testimony is not about me. It's about you. It's about every person reading this who still has a chance. Because let me tell you something, hell is real, but so is redemption. And fasting is the key that unlocked it for me. Some of you might be afraid to start fasting. You might think it's too extreme, too difficult, or unnecessary. Maybe you've been told that just believing in God is enough. But let me ask you this, has your life changed? Are you still struggling with the same sin? Do you still feel empty, no matter what you try? Do you pray, but feel like God is distant? I used to feel all of that, until I realized why Jesus Himself fasted. Fasting is not about depriving yourself of food. It's about starving your flesh and feeding your spirit. It's about removing distractions so you can hear God's voice clearly. It's about breaking every chain that has kept you bound. Jesus said in Matthew 17 verse 21, "This kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." Some of you are fighting battles that will not be won unless you fast. Some of you are crying out to God for answers, but you're too full of the world to receive them. Empty yourself. Make room for Him. I promise you, your life will never be the same. This is your moment. If you have read this testimony and felt something stirring in your heart, that is not a coincidence. That is God calling you. Don't ignore Him. Don't push it off for later. Start today. Even if it's just for one day, commit to fasting. Set aside time to pray. Open your Bible and let the Holy Spirit speak to you. Surrender everything. I am living proof that God will meet you there. He met me when I had nothing left. He met me in my pain, my confusion, my rebellion. And He transformed me completely. And if He did it for me, He will do it for you. If I had died that night, if Jesus had not pulled me out of hell, I would have been lost forever. That thought haunts me. Not because I fear hell anymore, but because I know there are so many people walking toward it right now. People who think they have more time, who assume they can get right with God later. But what if later never comes? What if tonight is your last chance? Don't wait. Don't gamble with eternity. Start seeking Him now. Start fasting now. Start praying now. Because the truth is, God has been waiting for you this whole time. And all He wants is for you to come home. If you've made it this far, it's because God is speaking to you. So don't ignore Him. Don't let this just be another story you hear and forget. Act. Fast. Pray. Seek Him with everything you have. And I promise you, He will answer. Because He loves you. Because He wants you. Because He is waiting. Do not wait until it's too late. Your chance is now.